On March 15, 2019, in a quiet suburb of Seattle, Washington, an event occurred that shook the local community and soon captured the attention of the entire nation. Jason Thompson, a 12-year-old boy, failed to return home after school. His absence wasn't immediately noticed. Jason's parents, Elizabeth and Robert Thompson, were busy preparing for a charity event scheduled for the following day. Elizabeth Thompson, 42, was well known in the city as a successful corporate lawyer and philanthropist. Her husband, Robert, 45, was a respected surgeon at the local hospital. They were considered pillars of the community, often featured in local news for their charitable work and contributions to various causes. The Thompsons' home, a large colonial-style house in an affluent neighborhood, was usually a hive of activity. That evening, however, the atmosphere was different. As the hours passed and Jason didn't show up, Elizabeth began to worry. She called Jason's friends, then his teachers, but no one had seen him since the final school bell rang. At 8:30 p.m., nearly 5 hours after Jason should have been home, Elizabeth finally called the police. Officer Sarah Martinez arrived at the Thompson residence within minutes. She found Elizabeth composed but visibly concerned, while Robert paced nervously in the background. "He's never done anything like this before," Elizabeth told Officer Martinez, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Jason knows he needs to call if he's going to be late." Officer Martinez began the standard missing person protocol, gathering information about Jason's appearance, his usual routine, and any recent changes in behavior. As she questioned the Thompsons, she couldn't help but notice the immaculate state of the house, the expensive artwork on the walls, and the trophies and certificates displayed prominently in the living room. "Is there anyone who might want to harm your family?" Officer Martinez asked, a standard question in such cases. Elizabeth and Robert exchanged a quick glance before Elizabeth replied, "No, absolutely not. Everyone loves Jason. He's a bright, well-behaved boy. We can't imagine why anyone would want to hurt him." As the night wore on, more police officers arrived. They began a thorough search of the neighborhood, questioning neighbors and checking security cameras. Jason's photo was distributed, and an Amber Alert was issued. The community quickly rallied around the Thompsons. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through nearby parks and wooded areas. Local news stations ran constant updates, and social media was flooded with Jason's picture and pleas for information. But as days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. Despite the extensive search efforts and media coverage, there was no trace of Jason Thompson. No ransom demands were made, no sightings were reported, and no evidence was found. The case took an unexpected turn when Detective Michael Chen was assigned to lead the investigation. Known for his meticulous approach and ability to see beyond the obvious, Chen began to dig deeper into the Thompson family's history and relationships. What he uncovered would shock the community and change the course of the investigation entirely. The perfect family image the Thompsons had cultivated was about to crumble, revealing dark secrets that had been carefully hidden for years. As the truth slowly came to light, it became clear that the disappearance of Jason Thompson was far more complex and far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The events that followed would challenge notions of family, reputation, and the lengths to which people will go to protect their secrets. The Thompson family had always been the embodiment of the American dream in their Seattle suburb. Elizabeth Thompson, with her Harvard law degree and sharp business acumen, had quickly risen through the ranks at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. Her pro bono work and involvement in various charitable organizations had earned her a reputation as a compassionate advocate for the less fortunate. Robert Thompson, her husband of 15 years, was equally accomplished. A graduate of Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, he had become one of the most sought-after cardiothoracic surgeons in the Pacific Northwest. His pioneering work in minimally invasive surgical techniques had saved countless lives and earned him numerous accolades within the medical community. Their son Jason seemed to be following in his parents' footsteps. At 12, he was already showing signs of exceptional intelligence and talent. He was a straight-A student, captain of the middle school debate team, and had recently won a statewide science fair with his project on renewable energy. The Thompsons' home was often the center of social gatherings in the neighborhood. Elizabeth hosted elegant dinner parties for colleagues and charity events, while Robert organized barbecues for the hospital staff. Their annual 4th of July celebration was a highlight of the community calendar. with fireworks displays that rivaled the city's official event. They were the family everyone aspired to be, recalled Sarah Johnson, a neighbor who had known the Thompsons for over a decade. Elizabeth always looked immaculate, even when she was just picking up the morning paper. Robert was the kind of dad who never missed a Little League game. And Jason, well, he was the kid every parent wished they had. But as Detective Chen delved deeper into the family's background, he began to notice discrepancies in the perfect image they presented to the world. His first clue came from Jason's school records. While the boy's grades were indeed exemplary, there were several notations from teachers about his behavior. Jason can be withdrawn at times, one teacher had written. He often seems reluctant to participate in group activities and has difficulty forming close friendships with his peers. Another report mentioned an incident where Jason had become unusually agitated during a routine fire drill, refusing to leave the classroom until his teacher physically guided him out. When questioned about it later, Jason had been unable or unwilling to explain his behavior. Chen also discovered that despite their apparent financial success, the Thompsons had taken out several large loans in recent years. Their credit card debt was substantial, and there were indications that they had refinanced their home multiple times. As Chen dug further, he uncovered a series of therapy sessions that Elizabeth had attended 2 years prior. The records were sealed, but the detective managed to learn that the sessions had been related to family stress and coping mechanisms. Perhaps most intriguing was a series of phone calls made from the Thompson home in the weeks leading up to Jason's disappearance. Several calls were made to a number that, when traced, belonged to a private investigator known for handling sensitive cases for high-profile clients. Something doesn't add up, Chen confided to his partner, Detective Lisa Ramirez. On the surface, they're the perfect American family, but underneath, there's something they're hiding, and I have a feeling it's connected to Jason's disappearance. As Chen prepared to interview the Thompsons again, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of this seemingly ideal family. Little did he know that the truth would be more shocking and heartbreaking than he could have ever imagined. As the investigation into Jason Thompson's disappearance entered its second week, the pressure on the Seattle Police Department intensified. Media scrutiny was relentless, with national news networks picking up the story of the missing boy from the perfect family. Detective Michael Chen felt the weight of expectation as he sat across from Elizabeth and Robert Thompson in the sterile interrogation room of the police station. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," Chen began, his voice calm and measured, "I appreciate you coming in today. We have a few more questions that might help us understand Jason's disappearance better." Elizabeth nodded, her posture rigid and her hands clasped tightly on the table. Robert sat beside her, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Chen started with seemingly innocuous questions about Jason's routine, his friends, and any recent changes in behavior. As the interview progressed, he gradually steered the conversation towards more sensitive topics. "Mrs. Thompson, our records show that you've been seeing a therapist recently. Can you tell me about that?" Chen asked, watching Elizabeth's reaction carefully. Elizabeth's composure faltered for a moment. Yes, I've been under a lot of stress with work. It's nothing unusual for someone in my position." "And the calls to the private investigator?" Chen pressed on. "Can you explain those?" Robert interjected, his voice strained. "That was for a case Elizabeth was working on. Client confidentiality, you understand." Chen nodded, making a note. He then turned to address a series of distressing calls that had been coming into the police tip line. "We've received several anonymous calls suggesting that Jason may have been unhappy at home," Chen said, watching the Thompsons closely. "One caller mentioned hearing arguments coming from your house in the weeks before Jason's disappearance. Can you shed any light on this?" Elizabeth's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "Detective, we're a normal family. We have disagreements like anyone else. But there was nothing out of the ordinary." As the interview continued, Chen noticed subtle inconsistencies in the Thompson stories. Their timelines didn't quite match up, and there were moments when their responses seemed rehearsed. Meanwhile, Detective Ramirez was following up on the anonymous tips. She interviewed neighbors, Jason's teachers, and his few close friends. A pattern began to emerge, one of a family that appeared perfect on the surface but harbored underlying tensions. Jason's best friend, Tyler Martinez, provided a particularly revealing interview. Jason sometimes talked about feeling trapped, Tyler confided. He said his parents expected too much from him, that he could never live up to their standards. Another breakthrough came when Ramirez discovered a hidden social media account belonging to Jason. The posts painted a picture of a troubled boy struggling with the weight of his parents' expectations and hiding a secret he felt he couldn't share. As Chen and Ramirez compared notes, they realized they were dealing with a far more complex situation than a simple missing persons case. The perfect facade of the Thompson family was beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of a darker reality beneath. The detectives decided to broaden their investigation, looking into Elizabeth and Robert's backgrounds more thoroughly. They requested financial records, interviewed colleagues, and began to piece together a timeline of the family's activities in the months leading up to Jason's disappearance. What they uncovered was a web of financial troubles, professional setbacks, and personal struggles that the Thompsons had carefully hidden from public view. Elizabeth's law firm was facing a major lawsuit, while Robert was being investigated for potential malpractice. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. As Chen reviewed the footage from traffic cameras near the Thompson home on the day of Jason's disappearance, he noticed something odd. At 3:45 p.m., just when Jason should have been arriving home from school, a car matching Elizabeth's was seen leaving the neighborhood at high speed. Chen felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, and the truth behind Jason Thompson's disappearance was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. As Detective Chen stared at the traffic camera footage showing Elizabeth Thompson's car speeding away from the neighborhood, he knew they had reached a critical juncture in the investigation. He immediately called Detective Ramirez to his office. "We need to bring Elizabeth in for questioning again," Chen said, his voice grave. "And this time, we separate them. I want to see how their stories hold up when they're not together." The next morning, Elizabeth and Robert Thompson arrived at the police station, unaware that they would be interviewed separately. Chen took Elizabeth to one interrogation room, while Ramirez led Robert to another. Chen started the interview with Elizabeth by showing her the traffic camera footage. "Mrs. Thompson, can you explain where you were going at 3:45 p.m. on the day Jason disappeared?" Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure cracked. She stared at the image, her hands trembling slightly. I had a last-minute errand to run," she stammered. "An errand so urgent you left right when your son was due home from school?" Chen pressed. As Elizabeth struggled to provide a coherent explanation, Ramirez was making progress with Robert in the other room. The surgeon, separated from his wife's controlling presence, began to unravel. "We never meant for any of this to happen," Robert blurted out, his head in his hands. "It was all supposed to be perfect. We had a reputation to maintain." Back in Elizabeth's interrogation room, Chen decided to change tactics. "Mrs. Thompson, we've spoken with Jason's friends and teachers. We know he was struggling. We know about the pressure he was under. What aren't you telling us about your family?" Elizabeth's facade finally crumbled. Tears streaming down her face, she began to reveal the truth behind the Thompson family's perfect image. The story that emerged was one of ambition, desperation, and a series of choices that had spiraled out of control. Elizabeth and Robert had built their lives on the foundation of success and reputation. But beneath the surface, they were drowning in debt, their careers were in jeopardy, and their marriage was falling apart. Jason, their only child, had become the repository for all their hopes and expectations. They pushed him relentlessly, demanding perfection in every aspect of his life. But Jason was struggling under the weight of these expectations, and he had recently threatened to expose the family's secrets. "He said he couldn't take it anymore," Elizabeth sobbed. "He threatened to tell everyone about our financial problems, about Robert's drinking, about the accident." The accident, as it turned out, was the key to everything. 2 years earlier, Robert had been involved in a hit-and-run incident after leaving a bar. A young woman had been seriously injured. Elizabeth had used her legal connections to cover it up, but the guilt and fear of discovery had been eating away at them ever since. Jason had discovered the truth and had been using it as leverage to gain some freedom from his parents' oppressive expectations. But on the day he disappeared, things had come to a head. "He was going to tell everyone," Elizabeth whispered. "He said he didn't care about our reputation anymore. He just wanted to be normal." As the detectives pieced together the events of that fateful day, A horrifying picture emerged. Elizabeth, desperate to prevent Jason from revealing their secrets, had confronted him when he got home from school. The argument had escalated, and in a moment of panic and rage, Elizabeth had struck Jason. "I didn't mean to hit him so hard," Elizabeth said, her voice barely audible. "He fell. He hit his head on the corner of the desk. There was so much blood." The truth was finally out, but the nightmare was far from over. Jason Thompson hadn't simply disappeared. He had been killed by his own mother in a desperate attempt to preserve the family's carefully constructed image of perfection. As Chen left the interrogation room, he felt a mixture of relief at solving the case and deep sadness at the tragedy that had unfolded. The search for Jason Thompson was over, but the real work of unraveling the web of lies and secrets was just beginning. The revelation of Jason Thompson's fate sent shockwaves through the Seattle community and beyond. As news broke of Elizabeth Thompson's confession, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. Reporters camped outside the police station, desperate for any additional details about the tragic turn of events. Inside, Detective Chen and his team worked tirelessly to corroborate Elizabeth's story and gather the necessary evidence. The focus now shifted from finding a missing boy to building a solid case against his mother. With Elizabeth's confession serving as a roadmap, the police obtained a warrant to search the Thompson residence thoroughly. Crime scene investigators combed through the house, paying particular attention to Jason's room and the study where the fatal confrontation had allegedly taken place. "We need to find the murder weapon and any traces of blood," Chen instructed his team. "If her story is true, there should be evidence to support it." As the search progressed, the investigators made several crucial discoveries. In the study, they found microscopic blood spatter on the corner of an antique desk, consistent with Elizabeth's account of Jason hitting his head. Luminol tests revealed attempts to clean up blood from the carpet and walls. But the most damning evidence came from the garage. Hidden behind a false panel in the wall, the police discovered a blood-stained rug wrapped around what appeared to be a body. Preliminary DNA tests confirmed it was Jason Thompson. With the physical evidence mounting, Chen brought Elizabeth in for a formal, recorded confession. In the interrogation room, Elizabeth sat slumped, a shadow of the confident, successful woman she had once appeared to be. "Mrs. Thompson," Chen began, his voice steady, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened on March 15th, from the beginning." Elizabeth took a shaky breath and started to speak. Her voice was hollow as she recounted the events of that fateful day. "Jason came home from school around 3:30. He was angry, said he couldn't take the pressure anymore. He threatened to go to the police about Robert's accident, to tell everyone about our financial problems. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen." She paused, closing her eyes as if reliving the moment. "I was terrified. Everything we had worked for was about to come crashing down. I just wanted him to be quiet, to understand what was at stake. I reached out to grab his arm, but he pulled away. That's when I hit him." Elizabeth described how Jason had stumbled backward, hitting his head on the corner of the desk. "There was so much blood," she whispered. "I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I checked for a pulse, but there wasn't one." What followed was a chilling account of Elizabeth's attempts to cover up her crime. She described wrapping Jason's body in the rug from his room, hiding it in the garage, and meticulously cleaning the study. She had then driven out of the neighborhood, disposing of cleaning materials and Jason's backpack in various dumpsters around the city. "I thought if I reported him missing, if I played the part of the worried mother, no one would suspect me," Elizabeth said, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted to protect our family, our reputation." As Elizabeth's confession continued, she revealed the extent of the pressure the family had been under. The financial struggles, Robert's drinking problem, the cover-up of the hit-and-run accident, all of it had created a pressure cooker environment that had ultimately exploded with tragic consequences. "I loved Jason," Elizabeth said, tears streaming down her face, "but I couldn't let him destroy everything we had built. I thought I was protecting him, protecting all of us, but I was wrong. So terribly wrong, terribly." As Chen concluded the interview, he felt a mix of emotions. Satisfaction at having solved the case, but also a deep sadness for the waste of a young life and the destruction of a family. Outside the interrogation room, Chen met with the district attorney to discuss charges. It was clear that Elizabeth Thompson would be facing a murder charge, but the extent of Robert's involvement in the cover-up was still to be determined. As news of Elizabeth's confession spread, the community that had once revered the Thompsons struggled to come to terms with the horrifying truth. The case served as a stark reminder that behind the facade of perfection, even the most seemingly ideal families can harbor dark secrets. The trial of Elizabeth Thompson began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after Jason's disappearance. The courthouse was surrounded by a sea of reporters and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the fall of a woman who had once been considered a pillar of the community. Inside the courtroom, Elizabeth sat at the defense table, a pale shadow of her former self. Her once immaculate appearance was now disheveled, her designer suits replaced by simple, muted clothing. Beside her, her attorney Mark Stevenson, a high-profile defense lawyer known for handling challenging cases, looked grim but determined. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Martinez, opened with a powerful statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice resonating through the packed courtroom, "this case is about the ultimate betrayal, a mother who, in a moment of desperation and selfishness, took the life of her own child to protect a facade of perfection." Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution methodically presented their case. Forensic experts testified about the blood evidence found in the Thompson home. Detectives Chen and Ramirez took the stand, recounting the investigation and Elizabeth's confession. Jason's teachers and friends provided heartbreaking testimony about the pressure he had been under and his increasing unhappiness in the months leading up to his death. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Robert Thompson. In exchange for a plea deal on charges of obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact, Robert agreed to testify against his wife. His voice shaking, he described the moment Elizabeth had called him in a panic on the day of Jason's death. "She told me there had been an accident," Robert said, avoiding Elizabeth's gaze. "When I got home, I found her cleaning the study. She begged me to help her hide what had happened. I was weak. I should have called the police, but I didn't. I helped her cover it up." The defense strategy, hinged on portraying Elizabeth as a loving mother, pushed to the breaking point by extreme circumstances. Stevenson argued that Jason's death was a tragic accident, not a premeditated murder. He called character witnesses who spoke about Elizabeth's dedication to her family and her charitable works. In a surprise move, Elizabeth herself took the stand. Her testimony was a mix of remorse and justification. "I loved my son more than anything in this world," she said, her voice cracking. "Everything I did for our family. I never meant to hurt Jason. It was a moment of madness, a terrible mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life." As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense made their closing arguments. DA Martinez painted a picture of a woman so obsessed with maintaining her perfect image that she was willing to sacrifice her own child. Stevenson, in contrast, appealed to the jury's compassion, arguing that Elizabeth was as much a victim of circumstance as Jason had been. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood to read it. "On the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant, Elizabeth Thompson, guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Elizabeth slumped in her chair, her facade finally crumbling completely as she broke down in sobs. Robert, sitting in the gallery, buried his face in his hands. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth returned to the courtroom for sentencing. Judge Harold Simmons, known for his no-nonsense approach, addressed her before pronouncing the sentence. "Mrs. Thompson, your actions have not only ended the life of your son, but have also destroyed your family and shaken this community to its core. While I acknowledge the pressures you were under, nothing can justify the taking of an innocent life, especially that of your own child." With that, Judge Simmons sentenced Elizabeth to 25 years to life in prison. As Elizabeth was led away in handcuffs, Detective Chen watched from the back of the courtroom. The case had taken a toll on him, challenging his perceptions of family and the lengths people will go to maintain appearances. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements, Chen reflected on the tragic outcome. The Thompson case had exposed the dark underbelly of the pursuit of perfection, serving as a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats to a child can come from within the family itself. In the months following Elizabeth Thompson's sentencing, the ripple effects of the case continued to be felt throughout Seattle and beyond. The story of the seemingly perfect family, torn apart by secrets, lies, and ultimately tragedy, became a cautionary tale that captivated the nation. Detective Michael Chen, the lead investigator on the case, found himself grappling with the aftermath. Sitting in his office late one evening, he pored over the case files one last time before they were to be archived. "You still here, Chen?" Detective Ramirez asked, poking her head into the office. Chen nodded, gesturing to the files. "Just trying to make sense of it all, I guess." Ramirez entered, taking a seat across from him. "Some cases stick with you. This is definitely one of them." The two detectives sat in silence for a moment, both reflecting on the twists and turns of the investigation that had consumed their lives for months. "You know," Chen began, "I keep thinking about Jason, about the pressure he was under, the secrets he was forced to keep. In trying to create the perfect life for him, his parents ended up destroying everything." Ramirez nodded solemnly. "It's a stark reminder of how appearances can be deceiving. The Thompsons seem to have it all, but beneath the surface." "Beneath the surface was a ticking time bomb," Chen finished, "and Jason was caught in the middle of it all." The case had sparked a broader conversation in the community about the pressure placed on children to succeed and the lengths to which some parents would go to maintain a facade of perfection. Local schools had implemented new programs to support students dealing with stress and anxiety, and parent groups had formed to discuss healthier ways of encouraging their children's growth and development. Robert Thompson, who had pleaded guilty to lesser charges, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for his role in covering up Jason's death. The once respected surgeon now found himself stripped of his medical license and ostracized by the community he had once been a part of. Elizabeth, meanwhile, began serving her sentence at the Washington Corrections Center for Women. Reports from prison officials indicated that she was struggling to adjust to her new reality, the weight of her actions seemingly crushing her spirit. As for the Thompsons' vast network of friends and associates, many were left questioning how well they had really known the family. The case had shattered their perception of the Thompsons and forced them to confront the reality that even those who seem to have it all can be hiding dark secrets. "You know what the saddest part is?" Chen said, closing the case file. "In the end, the very thing they were trying to protect, their reputation, was what they lost completely." Ramirez nodded in agreement. "It makes you wonder how many other families out there are living lies, doesn't it? How many other kids are suffering in silence?" The Thompson case had indeed opened a Pandora's box of sorts, prompting discussions about the pressure to maintain perfect appearances in the age of social media and constant public scrutiny. It served as a grim reminder that the pursuit of a flawless image can come at a devastating cost. As Chen and Ramirez prepared to leave the office, they knew that while this case was officially closed, its impact would be felt for years to come. The tragedy of Jason Thompson, a young life cut short by the very people meant to protect him, would serve as a lasting reminder of the dangers of prioritizing reputation over reality and the importance of looking beyond the carefully curated images that people present to the world. In the end, the case of the Thompson family stood as a stark cautionary tale, a reminder that true perfection is an illusion and that the pursuit of it can lead to the darkest of places. As Seattle and the nation at large continued to grapple with the lessons learned from this tragedy, one thing became clear. The price of maintaining a flawless reputation can sometimes be far too high to pay.